Good evening, everyone. Okay, I am taking immense pleasure in introducing you all to two stalwarts in the field of special education today, and they are Dr. Jed Baker and Mark Corallo. So I'll just brief you about Dr. Jed Baker. So Dr. Jed Baker is a director of the Social Skills Training Project in a private organization serving individuals with autism and social communication problems. He is on the Professional Advisory Board of Autism Today, Aspen, Answer, YAI, the Kelberman Center, and several other autism organizations. In addition, he writes lectures and provides training internationally on the topic of social skills training and managing challenging behaviors. He is an award-winning author of the 5 books including Social Skills Training for Children and Adolescents with Asperger's Syndrome and Social Communication Problems, Preparing for Life, the Complete Handbook for the Transition to Adulthood for Those with Autism and Asperger's Syndrome, the Social Skills Picture Book, the Social Skills Picture Book for High School and Beyond, and No More Meltdowns, Positive Strategies for Managing and Preventing Out-of-Control Behavior. His work has also been featured on ABC World News, Nightline, the CBS Early Show, and the Discovery Health Channel. Now, coming over to Mark Corallo. Something about him. Mark Corallo has been a practicing speech and language pathologist for over 20 years. He currently is a director of the Office of Autism within the New York City Department of Education. In addition, he runs Creative Communications, an inclusive social language-based arts program for children and adults. He specializes in the areas of social pragmatics and language development at the Social Skills Training Project with his colleague Dr. Jed Baker. He has written children's books and provides professional development and consultations in schools in the U.S. for speech pathologists and educators in supporting the use of social language in the classroom setting. Welcome speakers and welcome participants. A very good evening to all. Yes. And for today's session, Deepika Hoff is a co-host and she will be taking down all your questions towards the end of the sessions. Some rules that we can follow is we have to mute our speakers, mute our audio, allow the speakers to talk, and towards the end of the session, we'll give you 10 minutes to put in your questions in the chat section, which will be given to the speakers then. Welcome all.
I'll just very briefly a little bit of housekeeping. So I know it's difficult to kind of hold questions back to later. So what you can do is go ahead and add it to the chat. If you have a question to ask that is very urgent right then and there, there's a button there in the participants. If you click participants, you'll see a list of names and you can choose your name and click raise hand if it's a question that has to be asked immediately. But I would suggest that you put it in the comment chat. I'll compile all the questions and Dr. Baker and Mr. Corallo are going to be taking a look at those questions and answering them later. Okay? Because we have a lot to cover, so if we keep asking questions in the middle, we may not get to everything. So that's just a request. Okay.
Yes, so over to Dr. Baker and Mark.
Well, hello everyone.
And hello to you guys. Welcome, good evening, India, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. We're going to try to give you some really good information before I know you're trying to make dinner, so we want to make it quick for you so you can get something important down before dinner time. I want to start with a message of hope. Mark and I both are presenting to you from one of the epicenters here in the United States, in the state of New Jersey, which has a pretty high rate right now of COVID. But what gives us hope is knowing that we do have the whole globe working on antivirals and eventually a vaccine. So that gives us the hope we need to bear the restrictions that we're all dealing with globally. We also have hope because we're not hopeless in this. There's some things that we can control. And we know that social distancing works. We know that good hygiene works, that our protective equipment, masks, and other things that keep us safe can work. And so there are things we can do to just lower our exposure. But I talked to you about hope not just in the face of COVID-19, but also hope in how we handle our kids when we're locked up at home with them 24/7, sometimes in a small area. And what we know about hope is hope leads to better outcomes with kids when you as a parent or professional have hope. So one of my colleagues, Mark Durand, wrote a very interesting book called Optimistic Parenting. And in his book, he was looking at how to predict how aggressive or calm children, particularly with autism, but it goes for all children, at home would be, how aggressive or calm they would be. He looked at them from the ages of 3 to 6 years old. And the best predictor above everything else about how calm or aggressive they were in the home was parental optimism, the extent to which parents had hope that their child's behavior could improve. And when he looked at what hope, he found that hope translated for parents into understanding their kids' very difficult behaviors at moments as temporary. It's not forever. And that they understood their child's problem as, they defined it really as a gap between the demands you're placing on that child and their ability to cope in that moment. That makes it a solvable problem, right? Because then we can alter the demands we're placing on kids, and then we can teach them some skills. And that's what Mark and I are going to talk to you quite a bit today about. Mark's going to talk a lot about teaching your kids how to communicate better through the oral ways, through reading and writing. I'm going to talk to you just about how to communicate to replace challenging behaviors. It's important that we don't just see difficult behavior as intentional, because often when we see a kid is doing something on purpose, we get more angry and we escalate the problem. And the parents who did better in Mark Durand's studies were parents who didn't see their kids just doing this as simply intentional, angry behavior, but rather kids who were lacking in skills, and we could teach them those skills. So that's what we want to talk to you about. In general, I want to talk to you about how we sort of explain what's going on. We looked at all of the questions that you had, and we came up with this presentation to try to address those questions. Some were how to explain COVID to kids. Others were sort of how to handle that anxiety about this pandemic. Also about handling the disappointment about being stuck at home and not being able to do the things you used to do. And many questions were really about, so how do we become educators in the home? How do we sort of teach what they used to be learning in school? And so we're going to talk about the key to that is motivation. How do you get kids on board with wanting to do a school-related activity? Activities involved with helping them build their language skills, their reading and writing skills. Mark is going to do quite a bit on that. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about some of your questions were about really challenging behaviors like aggression, when kids are really having meltdowns and hurting themselves or hurting others. And I want to talk briefly about how you sort of understand that, put out the fire in the moment, but also how do you get ahead of that and prevent those behaviors. So let's first talk about how do you explain coronavirus to your kids. So, the ASA up on the screen there refers to Autism Society of America. They have a website, as does Autism Speaks. These are two websites that have some links to some pretty good picture stories that explain both typical influenza and flu viruses, as well as explaining the new coronavirus in sort of a comic book picture format. And you can go to those links. I put one of them up here for Autism Society of America to serve as a starting point to sort of read to your kids and talk about what it means, and show them picture what it means to have a virus. But the basic facts that then I would just verbally explain to kids who have pretty good language is to really just give them the straight ahead facts that it's a very contagious virus, and it can make some small percent of people very, very ill. The great majority will not get very, very ill. But to avoid getting it, we need to distance ourselves from others in public. And so here in the States, the rule on that has been to be about 6 feet away. That may be growing now that we find some other ways that, it can be aerosolized, but, 6 feet, and if not, maybe even a little bit more when you're in confined settings. And of course that we must, take protective measures when we go out in public, such as wearing a mouth covering now, and good hygiene, and avoid touching surfaces, and by all means avoid touching our face if we've touched anything. When we explain this to our kids as best we can, we have a little bit of fallout from that. Kids and families then worry, am I going to get this? Will the people I love get it? What will happen to us? So that's one issue I want to address, anxiety. The other issue is then, the frustration about what I have to do about this. I have to stay home. I can't go about and interact with other people. So things that I used to love were canceled, right? So let's deal with some of the anxiety first. So the first is Incredible Hulk. It's the part of our brain that kicks in when we feel threatened, when we feel worried, when we feel under attack. Fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain. And the problem with the alarm system, we need it, right? It keeps us safe. If a car's going to come hit us, we don't want to think about it. We just want to move into action, and our bodies will avoid that very quickly. But the problem is sometimes we can get these false alarms. And part of the alarm reaction is confusing because you can have shortness of breath when you have an anxiety attack, the tight feeling in your chest. You can have flushing and heat that you feel in your head. Your heart beats quickly. You can sweat a bit. All of these can also be sometimes symptoms of COVID, the coronavirus. So it can be a little confusing, but it's important then for people to understand just because they're having those symptoms doesn't necessarily mean they're having COVID. They could be having an anxiety attack. So in the absence of a persistent cough, in the absence of a fever, in the absence of exposure to somebody who's been tested. Now, I happen to have at home because I'm a worrier. I'm an anxious guy. Mark knows I'm a hypochondriacal guy. I worry about these things. I also happen to have an oximeter, which is just a little oxygen rating. So whenever I get nervous, because I have had some respiratory issues actually, where I have shortness of breath, and so I put my little oximeter on, and I find out my oxygen is fine. My oxygen to the blood is fine. So then I know, okay, I'm probably just having a little bit of an anxiety attack. So that's the one thing to sort of first understand, is that when you have those symptoms, that may just be a false alarm. The next thing is to learn to think like a scientist. When we talk about cognitive behavior therapy for anxiety, we call it CBT. We're talking about helping people think like a scientist to combat their worry. What does that mean? It means when you have a worrisome thought, we're going to look at the evidence as a scientist would. And there's two questions that we ask ourselves to combat our worrisome anxiety. Question number one, am I overestimating the probability of getting COVID or something bad happening? Am I overestimating that probability? What really is my probability? Number two, am I overestimating the severity? How bad would it be if I did get it? So, COVID has some real concerns that are it's realistic to have some anxiety about it. But if we look at the probability, we know that social distancing works. So if we reduce our exposure, my family, we're all at home just like the rest of you. I know if I don't go out, I know that if I take some protective measures when I go out, wear my mask, sometimes I will just wash with soap and water a package that is delivered, before I touch it, then wash my hands after. I know I'm limiting my exposure, lowering my probability. If I look at the severity of the illness, we know that more than 80% of people will not have major symptoms. And those who do, a small percentage of them might need hospital support. And then an even smaller percentage of them may need more intense hospital support. And then a very, very small percentage of them could, in fact, expire. But if you look at the risks by age, most of us have a pretty good profile. So we need to sort of think like a scientist to combat that fear, right? The other thing besides sort of thinking like a scientist to reduce your anxiety is there are certain things that can turn the volume down on the constant rumination and constant anxiety. 30 minutes of aerobic exercise per day reduces anxiety, increases confidence, and also for kids, by the way, increases attention, learning, and memory. Now, yesterday, I was inside all day. There was no way to get outside. It was not a very nice day. There's not a lot of room outside. So I went up and down my stairs or jogged in place while watching TV for 30 minutes. So just jogging in my house. And my wife almost took a YouTube video because I looked a little funny. But nevertheless, had a significant impact on reducing my anxiety. Meditation quiets the anxious mind. So there's ways to meditate and relax. Mindfulness meditation, what does it mean? It means learning to focus in on the moment rather than on some focal point. Could be your breathing, that you're focusing on your breathing in and out. Could be that you're focused on a sound that you hear. Could be that you just focus on a sensation in your body, tightening and relaxing certain muscles. Somebody may have their audio, so just mute your audio, otherwise you get some interference. For those of you who have your audio, there's a mute button on the lower left, and you can just hit mute. All right, so there's a free website, fragrant.heart.com, that I like to use with a lot of my kids. They have free mindfulness meditation guides, 6-7 minutes audio guides. And that can be very useful in just, especially at night when our anxiety comes out because there's no more distractions, that we put on a mindfulness meditation guide, we listen to it and try to focus in on either our breathing or tightening and relaxing muscles or whatever the guide is asking us to do. It gives us a focus rather than that sort of rumination worry. For less verbal kids who may not understand all the verbal information being imparted in those guides, we know that certain kinds of spa music, such as the song Weightless, there's a song called Weightless by Marconi Union, and that tune has been shown in a British study to reduce anxiety just by listening to the music, because it seems to be paced with our heartbeat and it slows that heartbeat down. So I often have groups of kids who are very restless and feeling anxious, and I just put that music on before we start our group, and that seems to calm. People's special interests are also meditative. I happen to be a drummer, and when I play music and I play drums, that special interest focuses my attention. So for a moment, I'm not ruminating about my worrisome thoughts. So when kids have special interests, it could even be a video game or all the Disney characters that they know. Indulging in that special interest can be a way to be mindful and a little bit away from the ruminative worry. Lastly, look, medications can be effective tool in reducing anxiety, and they can be temporary. We're going through an extraordinary time right now, and it may be that certain anti-anxiety medications, often they're also the antidepressant medications, could be useful in reducing anxiety, and they don't have to be lifelong that you're on these medications. Sometimes we just do it long enough to get us through a difficult period. So let's talk a little bit about handling the disappointment of having to stay at home, another major trigger to upset. What I say to many of my more verbal students who are struggling with this is that you're being heroic by staying home. You're saving lives. By not going about and potentially spreading the virus, you are saving particularly the lives of people who might be vulnerable. And so what are we doing? Everything we talk about today, Mark and I are going to talk to you about, is really about motivation. How do we motivate you to sort of agree with the restrictions to stay home? Part of that is by telling you you are being a hero. You're doing something very valuable. Now, I had a 35-year-old young man with autism, and he was not so interested in being a hero. He just wanted to see his friend. And he didn't care if it was going to, by staying home, it was saving his parents' lives. He was just mad that he couldn't see his best friend. So I used what he cared about, his best friend, to try to motivate him to stay in, which is if you want your friend to be safe, you have to stay away from your friend physically right now. You can call him, you can video chat with him, but you have to stay away from him. So find out what that individual is motivated towards and use that to convince them why they might have to stay in. We're going to have to provide alternatives if we're cooped up. Now, he can video chat his friend, but look, all of us may find some hobbies that we can be doing. So my wife and daughter have become watercolor artists. My whole dining room table is now an art studio. And so we are painting, we are drawing, we are playing games, we're playing board games, we're playing charades. I have become a cook. I am not a great cook, but I've become a cook. And so making food has become another alternative. Look, it's important if you can. I know it's hard, but in certain areas, but it's important to try to still get outside, get some air, get some sun. Obviously, we have to stay away from people, but it is important if we can to get outside briefly. So alternative to being cooped up. We need to give our parents, all of you who are listening, the patience to deal with children when they are really angry and frustrated that they can't go out. It's a grief response. They're grieving. We are all grieving our older lives, our previous lives. And so part of grief is we're in denial and we're angry for a while until people come to accept it. So you may, as a parent, have to repeat on a daily basis, no, we can't go out and play with our friends, but you can do this. We may have to repeat that 20 times a day. Don't give up hope on this. This is a process where your kids will eventually accept that new normal. They're going to ask, well, when is it over? When is it over? And we may not have an answer to that. We can answer this. It will be over, but we can't necessarily tell you exactly when. I think we can be sure that, in some year and a half, it should be very, very, close to being over. But prior to that, very hard to say. When logic fails and you can't sort of get your kid persuaded to stay in, you just have to distract them. When logic is gone, we have to just shift their attention, turn on their favorite show, start their favorite activity, start playing their favorite game, start playing their favorite song just to get them distracted. Okay. So I think the last thing I wanted to talk about before I shift over to Mark here is it is useful now when kids are at home 24/7 and not going to school to give them some kind of schedule, some kind of expectation about things to do during the day so that there isn't just a free-for-all, because when kids don't know what to do, they may make up their own things that can be challenging and they can have a lot of behavioral challenges. So you can go to Autism Society of America, Autism Speak websites. You'll find lots of examples of visual schedulers. There's an Apple app called Visual Scheduler. So it's an app that you can use to create a picture schedule where you put photographs in. And the schedule doesn't have to be fixed. It's a flexible schedule, but it's some sense of here's what I might be able to do today. You really want a mix of not just school activities. It's not realistic for parents to recreate the whole day of school. What is realistic? If you have a young kid, elementary school, maybe we're talking about an hour a day of work, and the rest of the time are some more fun and recreational activities, whether it's arts and crafts, or music, cooking, or helping around the house, or exercising, right? How do you get kids to do any of this kind of schoolwork? Well, look, many of us are used to using rewards. So what is a reward? Let's do these 3 math problems and then we can watch your video. Do this, then you get that. When you use a reward system, it's good to use a reward menu. And that's because what was rewarding on Monday may not still be rewarding on Tuesday. So when I use rewards, I usually have a photograph list of different kinds of rewards. You can watch your video, you can have your special snack, we can play this game. And so once we get this 2 math problems done, then you get to choose which reward you want. That's a better way to use external rewards. But motivation is not all about getting a reward afterwards, what we call an external reward. Sometimes it's actually making the thing that you're doing, like the school task, rewarding in and of itself. We call that intrinsic motivation. Make it intrinsically rewarding. How do we make school tasks, less scary? How do we make them more fun? So we have to think about how to make some activities more hands-on for people who don't want to just sit and listen to a story or have to write something. How do we make it more fun? So math, for example, can become a cooking lesson where we're using math in order to figure out how much of the ingredients we need to do. We make things less scary by showing less work to do. So if you have 9 math problems to do, hey, we're going to do 2 and then we take a break. And that's less intimidating. We can get a kid to sit down and do work if they don't see it as like a forever thing. Sometimes we model it. We show them how to do it first so it's not scary, so they don't worry that they're going to get it wrong or they're going to be frustrated. The 80-20 rule refers to giving them 80% of what they can do easily before you give them the 20% that's difficult. What do we mean by that? We mean give them something they can complete by themselves. So if I'm doing math again as an example, I'll purposely give them the math problems I know they can do on their own easily so they feel confident. And then after I've build the confidence, then I might give them a hard math problem where they need help. If you do it the other way around, if the first math problem they do is something they can't do and they're frustrated, they may get upset and you might lose them for an hour now. You can't get them to sit and do anything else. So start with things, preload it, front load it with stuff that's easy. Lastly, really important, for verbal kids, we've got to teach a growth mindset. Carol Dweck is a researcher, talks about growth mindset. Growth mindset means you're teaching kids that you're not supposed to know things right off the bat, that you learn things over time, that you're not unintelligent, you're not stupid, you're not dumb if you don't understand something yet. When kids have that kind of understanding somehow that they're not smart if they don't understand something, then they quit right off the bat. They're refusing to do the work. They feel stupid. You have to set the expectation before you do the work. Hey, you're not supposed to know this yet. When I was your age, this took me 3 months to learn. Let's see how long this takes us. We're going to make tons of mistakes because we don't know it yet. You've got to set that expectation so they don't dump out when they don't understand something. So, talking about making tasks more fun, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mark Corallo, and he can share with you ways to make learning language, reading, writing, and other things a lot more fun. So Mark, take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Jed. Hi, everyone. I'm going to just set up my screen for you, and then I will be able to talk with you about language and communication. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. Thank you for attending. As Jed said, we tried to take as many of your questions as possible and compile it into a presentation to be able to answer your questions. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today are really communication and language-based activities that you can apply in the home. Most of the activities that I'll be talking about apply to children who are early language learners, to mid-language learners, and to children who have verbal language skills. Jed said one thing that was really important, which is motivation. And remember, learning is fun, and it's meant to be fun. And if you task yourselves with really demanding tasks, is going to make it that much harder for the children. So that's just something I wanted to open up with. So let me go ahead and get my slideshow ready for you. Okay. So based on your current questions, what we're going to be talking about today in terms of language development and communication are many questions that parents have, such as terms such as echolalia and scripting. The use of visual supports. We all rely on them in our daily lives, so our kids will need them as well. Why? To help decrease anxiety and to support language. Motivation is what I just mentioned. It's key. We're all motivated to do things in order for us to get by in our daily lives. If we're not motivated, we're not so key to do them. Routine-based play, how we can support and develop language through routines. Repetition of questions. That was one of the questions that was asked. We're going to talk about that. How you expand language and communication while you are working with children at home right now. What is pragmatic language? And strategies for reading and writing. Okay, so the first question that was discussed was repetition of phrases and scripting. And it was, how do you stop that? And it's an age-old question that we have amongst parents, which is, how do you stop this behavior? And some people may look at it as a behavior, and some people may look at it actually as a function of language. We have two types of echolalia, immediate and delayed echolalia. So your immediate echolalia is your child who repeats back immediately what you say after you ask the question. So it might be something as, do you want to go to the store? And the child will say, do you want to go to the store? And a delayed echolalia might be phrases or sentences or scripts based on a television show, a movie, or music that you hear later in the day, months, or weeks. And so how do we support echolalia? Now, a lot of the times what I've experienced parents do when I was a home-based therapist was pretty much the age-old question of, how do I stop this? And the child asking the child to stop. And of course, it didn't stop. It was just rerouted in a different direction. So if you want to think about it from a language base, you might see something like this. Do you want juice? Yes. Do you want some juice? Or they might respond to yes, no questions and request. Do you want to watch TV? Yes. Do you want to watch TV? All right. So these are responses to questions. So in this particular example, echolalia can serve many functions, but in this particular point, we're talking about language, the child is understanding the question. The child just doesn't have the expressive language to be able to respond to the question the way you and I would respond to that question. And that's where we're going to talk about now strategies and communication supports that we can help children move along and develop some language to help reshape phrases that are functional and supportive in the home and at school. Okay? So for example, if we talk about turn taking, all right, let's go to our next slide. Okay, so I worked with a little girl when I first started out as a speech therapist, and it used to drive her parents crazy because she would walk around the house saying www.pbskids.org. And her mom would say, well, I don't know what to do. I don't know how we can stop this. And so what we did was we used two visual supports that you can find online, and it's a company called Boardmaker Online. I'll share that at the end again. And these are symbol supports along with written text that can be used to support children's language development. Now, there's many different types of symbol sets that you can use. This is just one form depending on your child's level of function and level of language. Okay? But what we did with this little girl was we tried to create a meaningful exchange by entering into her world and having her engage with us. So we took the script, www.pbskids.org, and we would say it back to her. And that made her stop. That made her listen. That made her look. That made her engage and join attention. These are very early learning skills that you would want to target in order to develop and support communication. So we would go back and forth with, it's your turn, it's my turn. Slowly over time, we would change the script. And by changing the script, you're also building in functional communication by having the child state, it's my turn, it's your turn. Now they're using their language functionally, and they're also engaging in play, and you're making communication fun. If you place demands on a child when they are not engaged or not listening, you won't get the same results. Okay, so one of the key things that you want to take away from this is that visual supports can help children in understanding language and their use of language, potentially verbally, depending on where they're at developmentally. All right, so just to finish up with echolalia, one of the supports that I provided for you was an example of if you had a child who repeated questions. And, the question might be, do you want some juice? Yes, do you want some juice? You would then model it with a visual sentence support. You could use this as a visual script, as I like to call them, or aided language, or visual supports. So here now the child is being presented with language. Yes, I want juice. You're going to shape and change the phrase from the delayed echolalic response to a more functional response. Same with, do you want to watch TV? I want to watch TV. Okay, this would help others in their environment as well know what they want as opposed to just providing you with an echolalic response. So remember, Jed was talking about this earlier in terms of visual schedules. Visuals provide and expose children to language and can increase their language development and also calm anxiety. Okay, so visual supports help expand verbal and vocal utterances. They support requesting, which is extremely important, and we're going to talk about that. One of the key things we want to remember for many children is that communication, particularly in school, can be passive communication, where children are taught to respond to questions, but how do they initiate? How do they engage in their environment? How do they make comments? How do they use their language? Okay, they can support initiation of communication. They expand our vocabulary. And the goal may be to fade sentences over time, particularly for our children who are mid-level language learners and are very strong visual learners. Children who are strong visual learners often remember visual scripts and phrases when they're faded, and they're able to use them in specific contexts that are taught naturally and meaningful and motivating. Okay, so Jed had also mentioned motivation. So here in New York, we're facing, I believe, very similar issues that families in India are facing as well, and it's the handling of behaviors, and it's presenting children with tasks that they may not want to do, and communication that may not be at the child's level of function, level of development, and parents are not equipped with the tools and strategies that a speech-language pathologist or other related service professionals might have to support communication. So one of the things we want to think about is always starting very simply and starting with is what most motivating to your child, okay? It's always about motivation. Once you have your child motivated, you can then build, support, and scaffold and provide language experience. Some examples could be you can increase their sentence length, you can support their requesting. So examples of support requesting could be as simple as blowing the bubbles. Okay. When I was talking with Kritika yesterday, we were talking about simple activities and not adding new tasks to what you're already doing, but to build in language to what you're already doing. So it could be as simple as a turn-taking activity of blowing bubbles, and the child just responds back, blow the bubbles. It could be a tunnel, open the tunnel. It could be you have a chair in your home that spins and your child likes to receive some sort of vestibular input. It could be spin the chair. And again, the more you do this and the more you model the language, the more the child will repeat the phrases that are being modeled for them if they have verbal capability. Okay. Jed had brought up visual schedules, and this is a little different. This is a skill-based activity with visual supports that you could use at home. And one of the things to think about when you're providing skill-based activities, number one is how motivating is it? But a lot of you like to cook. A lot of you do cook. Can you involve the whole family in the cooking activity? Can you involve a sibling in the cooking activity? Okay. In this particular activity, there are several things that you could do with language. You model language. You help to provide understanding of the activities and the directions that are being asked. The students can give each other directions, and they can request. And this is just a step-by-step guide to make something as simple as Jell-O pudding at home. But using these visual supports help families establish routines, and routines are what are very important. We all need routines to live by. If we don't have a routine, well, we feel out of sorts. And it's very much the same for our children. Okay? So when we talk about routines, we're also talking about routines in play. So we want to model highly motivating activities in the natural environment. So that's where I go back again to what we were talking about, something as simple as spinning a chair that has wheels. Okay? In that activity, what you may do is teach your child with visual supports. A simple phrase is, spin me again. Spin the chair. Push the chair. Push me. These are all requests. They're also giving you directives, and they're engaged with you. Okay? Many of our kids have social communication deficits, and this is an opportunity for children to socially engage with their family. And what we want to remember is we can use those visual opportunities through routine play-based activities. Okay? So we want to fade the language over time. That's our goal, if we can, is to remove the visuals, if possible, so that the child would be able to use the scripts with different people in different settings through the activity. Some examples that I came up with for you that we've done at the practice with lots of kids that we've taught parents what to do at home with is a simple game such as hide and go seek. You can teach phrases such as come and find me. I'm going to hide. The chase game, run. So if you have children who are speaking at a one-word level, you might teach them the word run. If you have children with emerging language and they have some words and some vocabulary, you might be able to model language for them and then teach them a script such as come and get me or come and chase me. The reinforcement that they would be receiving from that activity would be you come and grab them and you surprise them. Children love to be surprised. So that's the reinforcer. So Jed earlier was talking about reinforcement. How do you yourself act as a reinforcer and make an activity fun enough that this child does not need an extrinsic reinforcer? They are being reinforced by the activity in and of itself, with you being the primary reinforcer. Okay, you could do that through tunnel play. The child can go through the tunnel. You close the tunnel. The child has to say, open the tunnel. Okay, you open the tunnel, you say peekaboo. The child laughs. The child is engaged. It's a social, play-based, language-based experience. And the goal is to teach others in the environment the scripts that you're teaching your children so that they can use these functional language scripts and phrases in different contexts and in different experiences with different people. Okay? Another question that we received was repetition of questions in conversation. Now, when I've gone in and done school-based consults, we're talking about children here who are your verbal students who may exhibit some pieces of obsessive-compulsive disorder, some anxiety, and their self-interests may drive the conversation. So what happens is they may ask you questions that you know they know the answer to, but they will ask it over and over repeatedly looking for the same answer. The majority of times in my experience, that comes from obsessive-compulsive disorder. And what happens is that parents will try to Band-Aid that for a period of time, or other people will try to Band-Aid that for a period of time by answering the student or answering the child to relieve the anxiety, but it only lasts for a short period of time. So what we've done then with children like this is provided a visual support on a dry erase board or in their environment so that if the question is then asked again, a parent or a teacher or someone can then show them the answer to the question in their environment so the child is able to think about the answer and think about the question as opposed to then directly asking you repeatedly for the answer. And this will shift that behavior. Okay? Just to remember in regard to speech and communication, we can't make children talk. It's all based on their time, and a lot of it is based on intervention and supports and exposure to communicative opportunities. But what we want first and foremost is communication. Communication is key. Without communication, that's when we're going to deal with behaviors. So if we have children who are nonverbal or minimally verbal and they don't have access to a preferred mode of communication, this oftentimes is where we will see meltdowns because demands might be placed on them and they don't have the opportunity to say no or I don't want to do that, which is a very powerful statement. Okay? So we all communicate using different methods. Gestures, choices, crying is communication. Augmentative communication in symbols, sign language. So we want to think about this in terms of communication before we necessarily think about vocal or verbal speech. We want to think about what's easy, and we want to think about what's meaningful to the child, and how best are they able to function in their environment. So there's different systems out there called the picture exchange communication system. And that's a system that teaches a child how to initiate communication with communication partners by exchanging symbols. And research has shown that by using the picture exchange communication system, verbal language often develops. There's augmentative communication, sign language, and gestures. Okay? So I was talking earlier about the initiation of communication. And we want to remember more than anything that it's important for children to initiate as opposed to being passive. I'm not saying that passive communication is not important. We want children to understand question forms and we want them to be able to follow directions and understand what's happening in their environment. But so many of our children do not have the opportunity to initiate that it's up to us to provide them with those experiences. Okay? So how do we get children to initiate? Well, we have to set up those opportunities. We want to avoid doing for them. We want to help them make requests and initiate. We might do something as simple as hold a pair of socks in our hands, and we know that the child needs the socks to put on their feet, and then they have to simply request, I need my socks. This is something that you can build out throughout your day. They're going to have dinner, and they need a spoon. You hold the spoon back, so they simply just say, I want a spoon. That's a communicative opportunity. Okay? Activities that are done and fun in the home could be something as simple as letting a balloon go. You blow it up, you let it go in the air, the child laughs. The child is engaged. Once they are engaged, you now have the opportunity to build and scaffold. It could be a simple request such as more balloon. Now they're expanding their verbal language, they're jointly engaged, and they're using communication. Blow more bubbles. You could use cars to play. We have sensory play where you filled rice in boxes. I mean, many occupational therapists will do this to support sensory input, but you can also use this to support communication. You can close the box after several minutes of a child playing in rice or with beans. Then the child would have to say, open the box. You then reopen the box. So you're constantly creating opportunities for the student or the child to request. That goes the same for music. Turn it on. Okay? And you want communication to be fun and easy. And that goes back to what Jed was talking about earlier. If we place demands quickly, we won't get the same results. Okay? So these are just simple activities that I put in here for families to do at home that could be helpful for you. And I had mentioned one about asking for socks. You can make a game out of identifying and labeling body parts. You can talk about comments. Yum, you're eating chicken. Do you want more? What do you want? I want more chicken. Okay. Wow, the horse is jumping. Can you tell me the different animals that we're playing with? Okay, if you're reading a book, hold the pages back and simply have the child say, turn the page. Okay. Again, they're all requests. So now we're talking about pragmatic language, which is social language. And a lot of the times what we see in our school settings, particularly with traditional speech and language intervention, as well as in our classrooms, is the lack of implementation of social communication. So oftentimes more than not, a lot of our intervention is based on initiation and responsiveness to question forms, development of vocabulary, and knowledge of facts. But how are the children using their language. And if they're not using their language, that's going to hinder their opportunity to socially engage throughout their day. And we have to think about that as educators, because children are in school the majority of the day. And so we want to think about how we provide those opportunities for them. Pieces of pragmatic language consists of, being jointly engaged with another person, saying hello, saying goodbye, something as simple as taking a turn, asking for things, making comments, giving directions, initiating and responding to questions, conversation, and of course nonverbal language. And when we look at pragmatic language, we're looking at very early stage pieces of pragmatic language, such as joint attention, to making requests, to kiddos who are more verbal and using conversation and initiating and responding to those questions. But remember, anything can be adapted, which is what we're going to talk about now. So Dr. Baker had developed something called a conversation web that he uses and facilitates with students who are verbal to carry on a conversation and maintain topics. I adapted the conversation web to use it as a model to support more emerging learners or mid-level learners of language to be able to understand what a conversation is and how to use their language. In this particular modification, what I did was I used the web along with extrinsic reinforcers for points. So for example, if I have kiddos who don't know how to initiate a conversation or how to ask a question or respond to a question from a peer, we would put in a point system. And if one child might say to another child, "What's your favorite movie?" that child then gets a point. Okay? If the other child responds to that question and stays on topic, that child gets a point. Most of the times the kids have such a good time with this and they engage, and it's a way, again, to develop language. So Dr. Baker uses it as a form to facilitate, coach, and support conversation amongst kids who need to stay on topic and have a conversation amongst their peers. And I use it to support emerging learners and to model language and conversation and pragmatic language. Okay. In addition, I do something called the block game, which is where you take turns, have kids take turns with one another, and you could do this with an adult as well. And every time you ask each other a question or initiate a question, you make a tower. And then the bigger the tower, the more blocks you receive by asking each other the questions. And then when the blocks fall over, you start again. We do the nonverbal feeling game with certain kids who have verbal language skills but may miss social cues, where they can talk for hours on end but miss the verbal cues or the nonverbal cues rather of you might being bored, you might being sleepy, you might want to say something in the conversation. So we do what's called the check-in game, where someone might be talking for hours on end, but then you might start to fall asleep. And then the kids in the group have to figure out what your behavior is or what your feeling is, why that feeling is happening. So, he's falling asleep because he's bored. And then whoever gets it right gets a check. And then we have the topic game, which goes back to the conversation game, the conversation web, which is to try to stay on topic while we're using our WH questions. And the last one is the Can I Join You game for our kids who have anxiety or don't know how to initiate joining in with peers. And so what we do is we place children in small groups, and what kids have to do is walk around to different partners, tap them on the shoulder, and ask them if they can talk to them for a minute. And we make it like a speed dating game, and they have to rotate and talk to one another and ask each other questions. So again, that's initiating, and that's called the Can I Join You game. Okay, now regarding reading and writing, there's really two ways you could go about it. One way is what Dr. Baker was talking about earlier, where you simplify tasks and you use extrinsic reinforcers. First we'll do this, then you get this. Or you can even use a token reward board, which is you have a certain number of stars. If you complete the task after this many times, then you can choose the specific reinforcer that you want. Or you can also utilize reading and writing in a more intrinsic motivating sort of way, where you build in the writing tasks to support activities that the child may be actively motivated by. So for example, if you have a child who loves to play ball or loves to jump or loves to move, and Dr. Baker was talking about earlier about the importance of movement, and they love to jump, but you need to get a writing task in now. Well, maybe what you can have the child do is copy down a phrase such as, I want to jump, or even just write the phrase, I want to jump. Now they're working on writing, but immediately when they're done, they give you the phrase, especially if they're nonverbal. Now they're requesting. So they're using their language, and then they get the reinforcer. So you're including writing, you're including requesting, they're initiating, and they use their language. It would be the same for I would like to play ball and I want to swing. So what we want to think about here is that we're taking intrinsic activities and motivators, or rather extrinsic motivators, We're making an activity fun, but then we're letting that child engage in a motivating, meaningful experience so that they're being reinforced intrinsically. Okay? For our kiddos who are a little more verbal, we want to write stories that are fun and pick topics that are motivating. Always think about your WH questions when you do that, because that will help them develop the characters that they love, the setting, the actions, the problem, the resolution. And again, this supports intrinsic motivation. They can act out their stories at home for their family. They can record it on an iPhone. They can record it on an iPad. I used to do this with students all the time in the school setting, and they absolutely loved it. It was such a way for us to build on their language skills, and we were able to support and bridge that between the speech and language therapy services and the classroom. Okay? And remember, we want to pick books that are easier to read if you have kids that are really struggling with reading. So remember the 80-20 rule. Give them something that's easy to start. You'll get less resistance. Okay? Give breaks from reading when you can. Use reinforcing activities. Read about topics of interest. Get an audience and make it fun. Okay? So just to wrap up, remember that motivation is key. Don't demand communication. Make it fun. For children with limited language, support requesting and initiation. Words may develop based on the system that you're using with that child, and what's most important is their preferred mode of communication. Enter their world and figure it out. Engage, 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 and make learning fun. So that is my piece of the webinar for you. I want to thank you for your time. If you ever have any questions or you need to reach out, these are the two websites that you can find me at. And my Gmail information is on the bottom for you, and it will be on the webinar in case you have any further questions that you'd like to ask. So I'm going to turn everything back over to Jed now, and thank you, everyone.
Hi, guys. So, Mark, you just need to, yeah, there we go. I just need to put my screen up for you guys. And I really want to get to your questions, so I'm going to try to give you a very quick map of, something that often can be a 2-day seminar, which is really understanding really challenging behaviors and meltdown moments and what to do about meltdowns and sometimes aggression towards others or self-aggression, self-harm. It's really no different than what we've been talking about and Mark's been talking about. We're trying to give kids other ways to handle difficult situations. And so that's what we're talking about here. But I want to backtrack and give you a little bit of a sense of, what's happening for people when they have a meltdown, when they're really either really rageful or aggressive or sort of shutting down with anxiety and depression. One is what we call the forebrain. That's sort of the frontal lobes, the reasoning, planning part of the brain. And the other is the limbic system. That's our emotional sort of threat response system. And we refer to them as Dr. Banner and the Incredible Hulk. So we use the Marvel Comics analogy that many kids understand. You could also use Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde if you're more of a classic literature fan. But the concept is that there's this sort of incredible Hulk system that when we are threatened, we can get into this sort of fight, flight, or freeze mode. And it's not a logical mode. When we are threatened enough, the logical part of our brain, the Dr. Banner part of our brain, gets hijacked, sort of disappears. We're not logical anymore. We're just in this sort of state of sort of anger, which is, by the way, why discipline, punishment, doesn't really work so well for kids who are dysregulated. Because if the logic is gone, you kind of need logic to understand the threat of punishment. Logical kids can get that, and if you threaten punishment, they may respond to that. But someone who's really dysregulated, if you threaten them at the moment that they are the Incredible Hulk, what are you going to get? You're going to get more Incredible Hulk behavior. So it often escalates the problem. So when somebody is in this limbic Incredible Hulk zone, the best way to deal with it when logic is gone is try to distract them, soothe them, calm them. How do we do that? So I think of three categories. I'm looking at the sort of issue here of crisis management. Three categories to distract your kid when they're really in a either shut down with anxiety and depression, so that's an inward meltdown, or an outward meltdown, raging and aggressing at you or hitting and breaking things. Three things: novel items, special interests, sensory activities. Novel items are things they've never seen before. They're in the middle of a rage. They're throwing things. There's breaking things. And you come over with, I remember having these gold coins I got. I took a trip to Slovenia where I did a talk, and I got these gold coins. And we don't have gold coins in the United States. Rarely, but there are almost no gold coins in circulation. So that was interesting to this kid, a gold coin. And in the middle of his rage, I say, hey, did I ever give you one of these? And he comes and he looks at it, right? Other novel items that are also sensory items for kids who are less verbal. I often use scents. So like cinnamon, vanilla, different kinds of smells can all of a sudden be a shift out of a upset moment where they all of a sudden are experiencing something else. I'm a musician, so I like to think of all my percussion instruments. I have bongos and congas, and I have other kind of bells and whistles, and different sounds and musical instruments can be a novel item that take their attention away from what's bothering them, right? Special interest can be a great distractor. So in the middle of somebody's meltdown, we might go look at all of our, Disney characters in our Disney book, and that may be calming. Now, some of you might say, but isn't that reinforcing a tantrum? Well, it can if they're trying to avoid a task and you go right to Disney. Yeah, that they may learn, if I throw a tantrum, I don't have to do my work and I can just look at my Disney book. In those cases, when someone's trying to avoid a task, what are you trying to do? Simplify the task, but teach them a better way to avoid. You don't have to have a tantrum to avoid doing the work. Just say, I need a break. So as soon as they learn sort of to say, I need a break, I'm immediately going to give them the break. We'll do Disney for 5 minutes, then maybe we'll come back and do the work. However, if somebody is tantruming because you're out of their favorite food, it's hard to get food these days. It's hard to shop. It's hard to get stuff. And so a kid may be tantruming, they didn't get what they wanted, and you get their mind off of it by playing their favorite game. That's not reinforcing a tantrum because you didn't give them the food they want. You can't. You don't have it. You got their mind off of it. That's a calming activity. I'm giving you all permission to distract your kids in the midst of a meltdown and not just think about punishing, because that can make it worse for the Incredible Hulk. Okay. The main issue is prevention, though. We don't want to just put out the fire by distracting kids after the fact. We want to get good at figuring out what triggers them. And I'm going to give you a list of different kinds of things that often trigger our kids. And if I know what the trigger is, I may be able to modify that trigger and teach a kid a better way to handle it. So let's look at some triggers. I think the toughest one I put first here, which is internal triggers. Sometimes people have pain. Sometimes they're hungry. Sometimes they're exhausted and tired and therefore cranky. Sometimes they have psychological pain, such as grief. There's been a loss. Okay. We anticipate it's an internal trigger, an internal issue, when you see an increase in problematic behavior everywhere that kid goes all day long. There's something that that kid is carrying with them everywhere they go. It's not just a reaction to you trying to do a math problem or a reading assignment or a particular show you watched. There's something happening inside. So when a lot of times when we see a lot of self-injurious behavior or a lot of aggression towards others, sometimes that's a kid who's in pain. And if they're nonverbal, we want to maybe begin to teach a kid how to express where they feel their pain. So rather than just act out and hit, they can say, you know, every time they get hurt, they get a scrape, we'll use a word. Oh, boo-boo, boo-boo on your arm. And we can use pictures or dolls to show where we might put a Band-Aid on their arm, or they get a sore throat, put a Band-Aid on the throat, you know, boo-boo on the throat, right? And so then once they are used to sort of identifying on a picture or a doll where there's a boo-boo, or every time they had a boo-boo, you called it a boo-boo and pointed to the area, they may be able, when they're in pain, with your prompting to say, boo-boo, where's boo-boo? Boo-boo where? And they can point to it. And so instead of hitting you, maybe they tell you they have a sore throat so you can give them something to soothe their pain. Maybe they have gastroesophageal reflux. You know, we get a lot of GERD in the, for many kids have gastro issues, so maybe they need an antacid or something like that. Let's talk about sensory issues as another major trigger. Many of our kids are just overwhelmed by too much stimulation. They need quiet areas to de-stress. On the other hand, some of our kids, especially with ADHD, are understimulated. They get bored easily, and they need much more structure and stimulation. So, you know, we can alter the environment for them. We have to give our kids with ADHD a lot more sort of activities to do, because just sitting around and doing nothing is not good for a kid with hyperactivity. They need to get up, move around, exercise, hands-on activities. But we also want to teach them how to request the environment for them. So I had a young lady in a group who every time it got too noisy, she just shouted and began to hit people. But then she learned to say, Dr. Baker, I need a quiet place. I need a break. And so we gave her a break area where she could read magazines, use headphones to be quiet, and then once I got the group quiet, I would bring her back in. So we want kids to learn how to request the quiet time rather than tantrum for it. Okay? Let's talk about lack of structure as another major trigger. I mean here by lack of structure, when kids don't know what to do, problems may arise. If there's no structure at all, they may find things to do that are problematic. You know, a part of that may be also a lack of visual aids, meaning when we just explain things to kids, they may not always understand it, especially if kids have language-based problems. So we may have to have a visual schedule to show them, when exactly does my video game get turned off? When can I get the video game back again? You know, when you have kids who want to play video games 24 hours, 7 days a week in screen time, we're not telling them they can't do it, but we have to schedule it, right? So when you turn it off, they know it's not the end of the world because they can look on the schedule and they know when they can get it back. I'm more willing to turn off my video game if I know when I can get it back, okay? I put an interesting website here for you because, you know, I think of visual aids often when we read stories to kids who have language-based problems. They may tune out. They don't understand the story. They may need to see some visuals that go together with the story. So there's a wonderful website available now called StorylineOnline.net. These are celebrities who are reading classic children's stories to kids. So if you're feeling like you don't want your kid on screen time all the time and you want them to do something educational, this is a screen activity that is educational. You have work to do, you want to get on the phone, do a conference call, you could put your kid on StorylineOnline.net and they can have educational stories read to them by celebrities with animated voices who get excited and engage your kid. Let's talk about challenging work. We already did talk about this a little bit, and feared situations. I talked about anxiety, getting kids to do work. What do? We modify the work. We simplify it. We shorten it. We try to make it fun in the ways, for example, Mark talked about in making a language and reading and writing activities embedded into an activity they like doing. A real key, though, to teaching kids, a really important skill, is teaching them how to ask for help or to ask for a break. Rather than becoming oppositional and fighting with you, can they learn that if they ask for help, they can make this go quicker so they can be done and go to playtime? Like most kids with some ADHD or spectrum issues, they don't want to do the work. They just want to get done with the work. So I just want to play. So, okay, that's what you want to do. You want to play. If I help you, it'll go quicker. We'll just do this in two. We'll just do 2 of them, boom, and then you get to play. Okay? So teaching kids how not to be embarrassed to ask for help. It's really important. Carol Dweck showed us the key to a growth mindset, the key to success in life are 2 things. Don't give up and be willing to ask for help. Kids who ask for help have better learning outcomes. We need to teach our kids it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help. It doesn't mean you're not good at something. It means you're smart because you want to learn it. Asking for help helps you get better. Okay, so we have to get kids to overcome that fear. Having to wait or not get what you want, disappointments. It's a huge issue now, right? Kids can't get the foods they want, the activities they want, can't go outside. One thing we do is we use timers, visual supports, schedules in order to teach them when they can get what they want. So go back to video games, right? It's easier for me to sort of wait to play my video game or turn off a video game if I have a schedule, if it's clear to me when I can go back to it, right? If mom is on a conference call, it's easier for me to wait if there's a visual timer. If you go to Apple, you can see a bunch of apps that are visual timers. It's called Time Timer. There's a bunch of them, Time Timer. For kids who cannot tell time, they can see a shape shrinking. And so you can say, here's a shape. When the shape is gone, then you can talk to mommy. Okay, so you put a timer on and they see, it's easier to wait when you can see the passage of time. So they see a shape shrinking and then they can wait. I like to teach my kids, if they don't get what they want, there's something else to live for, right? It's not the end of the world. And so it's really important to kind of get that in the head before you disappoint them. You know, so before they have a chance to find out that you're out of their favorite food, you might say, if we're out of your favorite food, it's not the end of the world because I got some other really good stuff for you. Okay, we got to get that in their Dr. Banner forebrain before the Incredible Hulk kicks in, right? You got to prepare them for it. I use a disappointment poster in a lot of my homes, families, and schools that I work in. What is that? It means every time you don't get what you want, if you're calm about it, you're able to accept that because you're going to get other things, I'm going to put a point on the disappointment reward poster. When you get 20 points, you get a special reward. What does that do? It means that if I don't get something, I'm still earning. And I can earn something really cool. So sometimes we buy a child a reward only after they've accepted, maybe 6 or 7 disappointments. You just earned a reward. Okay, so it gives them always something to look forward to. Threats to self-esteem is another major trigger. So what is that? Kids who cannot. Some of you may have perfectionists out there. They can't tolerate losing a game. They can't tolerate making a mistake, being criticized, being teased, right? Those kinds of things. Let's talk about that. Carol Dweck, again, growth mindset, talks about the importance of making a mistake to learn. In fact, I'll do a little game with you right now. Okay, in the audience, I want all of you to say the word silk, S-I-L-K. I want you to say silk 5 times fast with me. Are you guys ready? We'll all try to do it at home. We'll say the word silk, S-I-L-K, 5 times fast. Here we go. Ready? Silk, 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 silk. Okay, now tell me, what do cows drink? What do cows drink? Now, some of you may have said milk, I'm guessing. But the answer is actually water. Cows drink water. So if you said milk, you made a mistake, but that's okay. That's how we learn. Let me prove it to you. I'm going to say the word silk 3 times fast again. Together, we'll do it. Ready? Here we go. Silk, silk, silk. What do cows drink? Hopefully this time you said water because you learn from mistakes. So I'll do that with my kids to help them learn and show them, look, mistakes are good. So here's what we're going to do. Every time you make a mistake, that means you're learning something new. So if you make a mistake and you learn from it, I'm going to give you 3 points on a reward chart. But if you get it right the first time, now that means maybe you're not learning anything new. So that's only worth 2 points, less points. So we give you more points for making a mistake and handling it than getting the work right the first time. Same with losing a game. If you lose a game and you don't get mad, we give you 3 points, right? Because you're managing the more important game of winning friendship, not just winning the game. You're winning friendship. On the other hand, if you win the game, well, that's only worth 2 points. So you get more points for handling losing. So we reward handling imperfection. Let's talk about the last trigger here, one of the last triggers, unmet wishes for attention. When kids don't get the attention they want, that's when they act out. Mom's on the phone, and that's when they're breaking things in the house and coming in like this. And frankly, I'm surprised my kids, who are, by the way, they're older, I'm still surprised they're not breaking the door down. But it's early in the morning here. But usually if I'm on a computer conference call, that's when they're coming in and doing a whole dance for me. So we give them attention on a schedule. So they know when they're going to get the one-on-one attention. So if I want my kids to sort of leave me alone while I'm on a conference call doing a workshop like this, then I have a schedule for them where they know they're going to get my dedicated one-on-one attention. Sometimes we use red and green lights. Red light means I'm busy, you can't come in. Green light is a visual, now you can come, right? So on the door to my office here, I might have a red light, green light. We can use timers again. When the time is up, that's when you can come to me, right? Some of our kids get attention in negative ways. They poke at us, they hit us, they throw stuff with a giggle, they're smiling. That's how you know it's attention seeking and not that just that they're mad. They have a big smile as they throw something at our head, right? Teach them okay ways to get attention, not okay. I write it down on a little cue card, or I might have a picture of it, a photograph of good ways to get attention, a photograph with a big X through it of ways you shouldn't get attention, right? And so that way the kids know how they can engage me in play and do something really fun in a way that doesn't drive me crazy, okay? So let's see. Question time. Last thing I want to tell you, right, in closing. How can we as parents tolerate our own discomfort long enough not to become the Incredible Hulk when our kids drive us crazy and we're cooped up 24/7 for maybe months at a time here? How do we not lose it? How do we use our Dr. Banner brain to figure out how to get ahead of the problem and not just react in anger or fear? And how can we find meaning in this? The toughest times are often the times that are also the most meaningful. We are forced to spend some very intense time with our children. You have an incredible, meaningful impact on your child's lives, more than ever. What we find when we look at life satisfaction and research on happiness is it's not making a lot of money that makes people happy in any sustained way. That's a very temporary pleasure. What makes people happy is the sense that they are having an impact, that they're important, that they're valued. All of you out there, all of you parents are doing incredibly valuable work. You are helping your kids to grow. You have the chance to have not great hedonistic pleasure right now, jumping up for joy, but great life satisfaction, knowing you have an important, meaningful impact on the lives of your kids and the lives of your family members. So give yourself a round of applause for that. Okay, and with that, let me take some questions. Mark and I can take any of the questions that you guys have. Let me stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, parents, please go ahead and ask some questions, whatever you like. We just have 10 minutes more.
There are some questions already in the chat, so I'll just go ahead and read those out.
If he could elaborate more on the last point about how we help ourselves, that would be great.
Yeah, and I see some other questions here too.
Yeah, I put them all at the bottom of the chat.
You want me to just, shall we just read the questions, or you want to read them out loud?
You can go ahead and read them, no, Jet? If you are more comfortable with that?
Yeah, I can read some of the questions here. I saw one question about from ANV that much doesn't like listening to stories, watching cartoons, movies, etc. And so, this is where we sort of need more visual aid, because if they don't comprehend the story, they're going to tune out. So we have to find a more appropriate story or cartoon that would be easier to understand. Some cartoons can be, in fact, quite complex. But sometimes what we can do is sort of act out a story in theatrical form to sort of show what's actually happening in the story. But then again, if the story's too complex, they may not understand it. So it's really about picking the right story there. Mark, I don't know if you wanted to say more about that.
Yeah, is that to the ANV question for the should I be afraid of this?
Oh, yeah. No, it was another part. I had
another question.
Okay.
A later question she had, but.
So I'm just pasting the questions to the everyone chat towards the end, so you can just take a look at there.
I see.
One question was, what if the child is in a tantrum because things don't go their way? Example, lost a game and couldn't engage in play.
Yeah, so I was just talking about that a little bit. Look, in the moment of a tantrum, after it's happening, you're really in distraction mode. That's crisis mode. You have a little bit of an Incredible Hulk. I'm not going to, if he's not open to, he or she's not open to learning at that moment, that it's important to be able to be a good sport, that you win a friend that way. If I can't get them on track, then I'm just distracting them. Hey, come here, let's go do something else. And I get their mind off of it and try to do some other favorite activity. What I do with kids like that is I let them win a couple of times. 80-20 rule. Get them in a good mood. It's easier to lose a game if they've already won a couple, so that they have more confidence. But going forward, the bigger skill that kid needs to learn is how to deal with losing. And how do we do that? Before we even start playing the game, we remind them, well, if you lose the game today, you win the invisible game, the game of friendship. And I'm giving you extra points if you do that. So if you lose the game, you get extra snack today. If you win the game, you don't get anything for that, because that's easy to deal with. But if you lose the game, you can handle it. Then you get extra points. And then so when I see them about to roll the dice or whatever game we're playing and I think they might lose, I say, oh, you might lose, and that would be great, because if you lose the game, you get extra points and extra snacks. So we're just trying to keep preparing them. But guess what? It won't work the first 7 times, the first 8 times. This is going to be something you keep at. And by the 10th time, they say to you, you don't have to let me win anymore, Dr. Baker. I'm okay now. They'll let you know.
All right, time is running out. We just have one last question. Deepika, can you just...
So let's. So the question that's just come in is, how does one teach social skills to a 24-year-old who is a high-functioning autism?
Is this 24-year-old a verbal individual or less verbal? Someone capable of, I can explain things with words, or?
I think pretty verbal. That's what the parents written.
Okay. Do you want to go first and then I'll take it back?
Okay, sure. I mean, so here's the thing. By the time you're 24 years old, a lot of the time people are depressed about their situation. And so the first order of business for me when I work with a 24-year-old, and a 4-year-old for that matter, is to go over their talents, their abilities, and their strengths first, to help them understand what a great future they can have, that they do have talents, that life isn't hopeless, that they do have a lot that they can offer. And once we list a long list of their talents and abilities that can lead to an optimistic future, that's when I talk about a couple of challenges. And what are we talking about with social skills? I don't need to teach all social skills. I need to ask these 2 very practical questions. What does this individual do too much of or too little of on a daily basis that interferes with social functioning? Too much, too little. So is this a person who doesn't ever initiate conversation or try to get a job anymore? Or what's missing, right? Or what do they do too much of? Do they talk endlessly about their interests and push people away because they don't read the other person? So I'm going to carve out a couple of skills that we're going to work on to improve situation, and then we teach the skill. We practice it. But I got to know, are they motivated? How do you motivate somebody, right? You motivate them by, look, you kind of said you were interested in dating this person. You could potentially date this person if I can teach you those skills, right? They're easy enough to learn. We can teach this to you. So you have to motivate them. You have to worry about generalization. Just because I taught you something in my counseling session is no guarantee you're going to take it out into the real world. So how do we do that? We write it down on a cue card for you, or on your iPhone. It comes up as a reminder app that when you're about to talk to this person, remember to do these things, right? That's how you generalize. You cue them just before they need it. Okay. Sometimes what we also have to do, another key component of social skills training, is not teaching our client, but teaching others to be more engaging. So have I found people for this individual who are going to be more accepting, whether it's a worker, a boss who is open to hiring somebody who might have some social challenges but otherwise has great skill, right? Or a community of people. So in fact, there are dating sites for people with Asperger's, autism, learning disabilities. So sometimes we have to look at those communities of folks. So target relevant skills, motivation, teach the right way, generalization, and then making sure you have an accepting environment. Those are some 5 components that are key to teaching social skills.
Yeah, just to piggyback off that, which is absolutely it. You know, at the practice, one of the things that I've done with individuals who are adults who are verbal and high functioning on the spectrum is a lot of the times teaching from a cognitive perspective and having them understand what pragmatic language is, and having them themselves understand what nonverbal language is, and when and how to use skills. Because when you talk about social skills, it's such a broad term. So again, it goes back to what Dr. Baker was talking about in terms of motivation and generalization, and making sure that you bring the family in so that the family can practice the skills with the individual if the individual is motivated to do that. If there's other variables that are affecting that individual, such as depression or not wanting to go out, or may not be intrinsically motivated to want to develop relationships with people, then that's something in addition that you need to look at to support that individual as a whole, besides just teaching social skills.
And look, a shameless plug, but if you can see the screen, on the bottom right are 2 books. One is Preparing for Life. The other is a picture book. These are for older students into adulthood. Preparing for Life is a social skill manual for people of that age, 24, or it begins in sort of late high school into adulthood. And there's also a social skill picture book that shows sort of photographs, right way and wrong way. So these are just some of the books that I have out. This is my shameless, gratuitous advertisement. But nevertheless, they're all available on Amazon, and some of them are digital at this point, so you don't need a hard copy. You can get them downloaded. Overcoming Anxiety is a book that we spoke a little bit about today. As well. So these are just some resources on Amazon that provide more detail on some of the stuff we alluded to today.
Sorry to interrupt, Jed. The examples that you shared in how to manage the meltdowns and things, are those available in these resources? Because a lot of the examples you gave me, spoke to me bang on based on what situation I had to face today with my child. So will I find strategies on coping?
Yeah, so No More Meltdowns is really it's a quick read, short book. It's an audible book or a digital download, as well as a paper book. So No More Meltdowns is really a book about the different sort of triggers to challenging behaviors, how parents can manage themselves first, right, by having that sort of hopeful attitude. Parents, how do we manage ourselves? We have to think the right way about it. My kid's behavior, as awful as it is right now, it's temporary. They're missing some skills, or the demands I'm placing on them right now are too large for their coping skills. So I got to go to the drawing board, figure out how to modify those demands, teach those skills. If I think the right way, I get less angry. If I think this kid is doing it on purpose just to drive me crazy, well, then we're going to have an escalation. So No More Meltdowns sort of is about the triggers and creating prevention plans for all those triggering behaviors.
You all have been a wonderful audience, and on behalf of MindSaid Learning Center, I thank Dr. Baker and Mark for all their strategies and inputs regarding the questions put forth to them by the parents. And in case we want to, we can never have enough of y'all. It's been such a very good session and enlightening one. So thank you everyone. Stay home, stay safe, and you can always, parents can get in touch with us or the speakers if you all have any more questions, and we are always there to help you all out. All right. Thank you so much everyone. Thanks, Mark.